Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I'm a sewing content creator and pattern designer for Know Me Patterns. In today's video, we're going to be sewing along to one of my latest Know Me fall patterns, and that is Know Me 2133. This is a unisex moto style jacket. It has contrasting fabric on it, and you can use a sherpa, a faux fur, a corduroy. You can also just use the same fabric, maybe in a different colorway. This is the jacket here that I made during the video. I did use black fabric, but for all of my stitches, I did use white thread. So hopefully you'll be able to see everything clearly in the video. You will need a separating jacket zipper for this video, and I'll be sure to link the tools that I use because you do have to shorten that zipper. So I'll link the pliers, and it's another tool that I use to help pull the teeth off of the zipper tape. I'll be sure to link that if you need to shorten your zipper. Go ahead and cut out all your fabric pieces and transfer your markings, and let's start sewing. To begin, let's start working with pattern piece number 1. This is the right side front. And the first thing that you want to do is go ahead and transfer your dots as well as all your lines right here for your welts. As you can see, I've transferred all of mine. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch all the way along the outside here along the stitching line. Now I do want to point out that the instructions just have you stitching around the corners and about an inch above that here. So you can take a look at your instructions to see what I'm talking about at step 2. But I prefer to just stitch all the way around the stitching box. Let's go ahead and stitch along the stitching line now. Now that we have stitched along our stitching line, you can see I've done mine here, and I am using white thread for this project. That way you'll be able to see everything clearly since I'm using a really dark fabric here. So again, go ahead and stitch around your stitching line. And now let's go ahead and grab the welt. For the welt, you should have cut out 2, and with wrong sides together, this is the wrong side of the fabric. You want to go ahead and fold it together like so. So the right side of your fabric should be out facing you. And let's go ahead and give this a press. All right, I have my welt pressed in half. The right side is facing out. Now we can go to the machine and do a top stitch right here from the folded edge. So we're going to do a 1/4 inch top stitch. And then you can baste the raw edges here together. All right, friends, so I have done my top stitch right here along the welt. This is a 1/4 inch from the folded edge. And for the raw edges here, I've just basted them together. Next, let's go ahead and grab the right front. Taking our welt here, we're going to put it along the first stitching line. So as you can see here on the right front, this would be the front of it. This is the side seam right here with the armhole. I'm going to be matching up with this first stitching line here. So I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer, but again, I just wanted to make sure you knew exactly which line I was putting this on. So matching up our dots here, you should have 3 on this first stitching line. We're going to match that up with these here. Grab some pins and let's pin in place. I'm also going to pin along the line as well. That way when I'm stitching, I'm keeping everything nice and straight. All right, so I've just gone ahead and pinned the welt, matching up those circles as well as the stitching line. We can go ahead and baste this in place, following along with our previous basting stitch on the welt. So let's go ahead and baste right here between these large circles. Do not go past the circles. All right, now that we have that welt basted on, it should look similar to this. Let's go ahead and grab the pocket lining. For our lining, we're going to need pattern piece number 4. You should have cut 2 out of lining. And this is the wrong side of my lining here. You can see I've indicated that with the X. So when you place your lining down, right sides facing, so your lining will look like this when you first lay it down. Again, the wrong side of the lining will be up facing toward you, and we're matching up these 3 dots. So before I pin this, I'm going to just transfer a line connecting these dots. And so now we're going to match up these 3 dots here. I'm going to place it right over like so. Go ahead and grab your pins and pin through, and everything should still be matching up. Go through your previous dots. Make sure you're going through your welt as well. See, I'm coming right out of that corner. Once you have your pocket lining pinned on, again, you have matched up those 3 dots. Let's go ahead and stitch using our regular machine stitch. We're not basting anymore. Let's go ahead and stitch, being sure to stop and start at those large dots. Do not go past them. Let's do that now. Pocket lining is stitched on, and this is what that looks like. Your welt should be sandwiched in between that, like so. Now I'm going to go ahead and slash right here along this slash line that's in the middle of our welt box. And so I just like to start mine with my rotary cutter, grab my shears, and then go ahead and cut up to that first dot, and then clip toward the corners like so diagonally. All right, this is what yours should look like right now. Now let's go ahead and push the lining as well as the welt toward the inside. Now we can go ahead and give this a press. You want to press your lining away from your welt. So just give that a press like so. Now that we have given it a press, this is what mine look like here along the inside. We will trim down this seam in a later step right here, but if you want to go ahead and do it now, you can. And so again, this is what this looks like along the inside of the garment, and this is what mine look like on the outside here. If I was using black thread, you wouldn't be able to see these little stitches here in the corner. So definitely make sure that you're using coordinating thread to your fabric. I'm only using contrasting thread for the video, so you all will be able to clearly see my stitches. And so now let's go back to the inside, and we want to go ahead and grab the pocket, which is pattern piece number 3. You should have cut out 2. And so these 2 large dots up here toward the edge, we're going to match up with this side of the welt, the 2 large dots that we transferred over here. And so with right sides facing, we put an X right here so you can clearly see this is the wrong side of the pocket here. So with right sides facing, go ahead and lay it down like so. You do have some double notches on your pocket that matches up to the lining. We can pin there. But first I am going to pin at these dots in the corner. Make sure the welt is out of the way, and we're going to match it up here with this corner, this dot here. Put it right there. Pin that in place. Come down to this other dot, and right there in that corner. Pin that in place. And I'm going to match up the raw edges here and pin as well. Now I didn't transfer a line to connect it here because I'm actually going to follow along with this stitching line that we already have. And so starting at the large dot, I'm going to stitch all the way down to the other dot, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Let's go ahead and stitch this now. This is what that seam looks like now that we have it stitched. I'm going to trim away my loose threads here. Next, you want to make sure that you have your welt pushed out. Again, it should be pushed out away from the lining. This is the lining. Make sure you have your welt pushed out. And so bring your pocket over like so. On the right side, you should be able to see your welt up like this on the outside. If you don't see this, again, make sure that you push your welt away from the lining. And so now on the inside, we need to stitch the triangles and the welt to the pocket, and we'll stitch all the way around our pocket now. So again, I'm going to grab all of the layers here, including these triangles that we clipped. Make sure that we fold these in so that we can stitch. Pin in place. Should have transferred some double notches, match those up. So now let's go ahead and stitch around our pocket. Again, make sure that you catch in the triangles here, and then I am going to finish mine off with my serger. Let's go ahead and stitch it now. I have my pocket all sewn and I have finished off the edges with my serger. I will go back and kind of tie knots to clean off the serger edges here. And on the outside, this is what my welt looks like. Again, if I was using coordinating thread, you won't be able to see these little bits in the corner. So definitely make sure that you are using coordinating thread to your fabric. I'll be honest, my welt could be a little bit cleaner here in the corners, but this is what we have today. So go ahead and sew your welt. You want to do the same for both. And once you have both of them done, we can move on to the next step. The next thing is for us to start to work on our back. You want to go ahead and grab your welt. And as you can see here, I've done stay stitching. I did it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the neck edge. And I started at the shoulders and came to the center with my stay stitch. I did not start from one side and stitch to the other. So go ahead and do stay stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the yoke neck edge. Once you have that done, go ahead and grab your back, pattern piece 11. And with right sides together, we are going to pin the yoke to the back, matching up our notches. Let's go ahead and match those up and pin in place. Let's go ahead and stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your yoke stitched onto the back, you want to go ahead and finish off your seam. I finished mine off with my serger and I pressed the seam going up toward the yoke. Now along the outside, we can go ahead and do a 1/4 inch top stitch right here beside this seam. Make sure that you're stitching it on the yoke. Let's go ahead and do a 1/4 inch top stitch now, all the way along the yoke seam. Now that we have our top stitch done, this is what mine looks like here. Now let's go ahead and grab our fronts and we're going to pin them together along the side seam. So with right sides together, you want to go ahead and match up your front and back along the side. Find your notches and pin in place. All right, once you have one side pinned, pin the other side the same exact way, and let's go ahead and stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your side seam sewn, you can go ahead and finish it off with your serger, and I've just pressed mine going toward the back. You can press your seam open flat if you prefer, but go ahead and sew your side seams and finish them off. And now let's start to work on the lower bands. All right, for the lower band, you need pattern piece number 7, 9, and 12. You should have cut one out of all of these out of your contrasting fabric. You could be using a sherpa fabric, a faux fur. You could even use corduroy as your contrasting fabric if you like. So go ahead and grab those pattern pieces. And with right sides together, I'm going to match up my notches. So this is pattern piece number 7 here. I have it right sides facing. Again, match up your notches. I need to transfer my markings. Transfer your markings if you did not. I just had to go back and transfer mine. And so now with right sides facing, go ahead and match up those notches and pin in place. Now, if you have a really high pile, especially if you're using like a faux fur, you may want to trim down the seam allowance here. You may also want to consider using some clips if you need clips for your fabric, for your contrasting fabric, if that's a better option for your contrasting fabric, just to hold everything together. But once you have them pinned along the sides and you've matched up the notches, let's go ahead and stitch in place using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. It may be helpful to put on a walking foot if you do not have one on your machine like mine is integrated on. But if you don't have that, you can absolutely just pop on a walking foot. That's going to help feed through both layers here. All right, I have my lower bands stitched together. And again, if you want to kind of trim down, or maybe you have like a little shaver, you can shave down your seam allowance if that's something you like to do. And as you can see, I did go ahead and serge off the unnotched edge of my lower bands. I did that because we're going to stitch the notch edge to the lower edge of the jacket, and then we're just going to fold this in half and then stitch this in place. And so I wanted to have this edge finished so that it's not unraveling and, you know, all of the fuzzies these are getting everywhere on the inside of my garment. And so now with the right sides facing, let's go ahead and grab the jacket. And we're going to match up the side seams as well as the notches and pin it in place. Again, right sides facing. All right, once you have the lower bands pinned on to the lower edge of the jacket, let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your lower band stitched on, it should look similar to this. As you can see, I went ahead and finished off my edge. Now that we have that sewn, you have your seam allowance going down toward the lower edge. Let's go ahead and put this to the side and we can start to work on the right front. For our right front, we need pattern piece number 5 and you should have cut out 1. The first thing that you want to do is go ahead and do stay stitching to that first inner circle that we transferred up here along the neckline edge. So start at your shoulder seam and then do a 1/2 of an inch stay stitch right to that dot. I've already done mine, so go ahead and do yours and then grab pattern piece number 6. Pattern piece number 6 is the front band and you should have cut 1. And so now with right sides facing, you want to match up your notches. Should have transferred a notch on the lower edge of the right front and the lower edge of the front band. So with right sides facing, go ahead and match that up and pin in place. Once you have it pinned, go ahead and stitch the front band to the right front, right across the lower edge here in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have the band sewn to the front, now we can go ahead and press our seam going down. You don't need to finish off the raw edge, but I just finished off mine. Just make sure you have your seam pressed down. We can put this to the side and start to work on the zipper. All right, friends, here are my 26-inch separating zippers, and these are really long. So this is really long. That's 26. I also have 24. Okay, they are much shorter, so I won't have to cut away so much of it. I'm still going to have to trim this down, but I won't have to trim away as much. And so I'm going to put the bottom of the zipper stop right down here with the dot on the lower band. So this is where my dot is, and I need this to be right here where the dot is. So I'm going to transfer a mark right here. So again, I need to remove these zipper teeth and bring them down so that it's right here at these markings. To shorten the zipper, I'm going to be using these 2 tools right here. These are some pliers and these are like some grabbers. I don't know what this tool is called exactly, but I'm going to grab the teeth with this tool right here and pull them off and then reposition them. Use the pliers to then squeeze them in place. Now that we have our zipper shortened, let's go ahead and separate it. Go ahead and separate your zipper, and you want to take a look at it because the instruction says to place the slider side down, but this would actually be the wrong side of the zipper. So depending on which way your zipper is made, your slider could be on the other side. Pay attention to that before you just pin it down. I have the lower end of the zipper. I'm going to make sure that's down here with this dot that we transferred. I'm just going to pin that in place. I have the tape within my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here, and you want your zipper teeth to extend about 1/16 past your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here. I have mine over so that my zipper tape is within that seam allowance and that the zipper teeth extends just slightly. And you also want to taper the end. Don't just have it straight up. Kind of taper your end off into that seam allowance up there, and let's just start pinning the zipper in place. Once you have it pinned, now let's go ahead and baste it in place. Now that you have this portion of your zipper basted on, let's go ahead and grab the right front. And with right sides facing, we're going to be sandwiching in that zipper here, right between that right front. So match up your circles and pin in place. And again, the right front has the right band attached to it. So match up that seam down here as well as best as you can. Probably be kind of hard, but just match it up as best as you can. Pin in place, and again, match up that circle down here at the bottom as well. Once you have it pinned, let's go ahead and stitch, starting at the top, back stitch at the beginning, and let's go all the way down to the end, back stitch once you get to the end. So let's go ahead and stitch now, again from that shoulder seam all the way down to the lower end. Now that we have that seam sewn, this is what it looks like on the right side here. And again, you want to try to meet up this seam here as best as possible. I got a little bit of sherpa above it, but that's okay. Again, just try to make sure you match up that seam there. And so now before we go to the next step, right here at our circle that's on our lower band, you want to go ahead and just clip right to that circle. Let me make sure I'm clipping right here. Do not clip through your stitching, just clip right up to the dot. Now we can go ahead and press your seam toward the side front so that the zipper falls out toward the front. If you want to, you can go to your serger and individually serge these edges to finish them off. Just be careful though not to cut up your zipper tape. All right, once you have your seam pressed going toward the side front, now we can go ahead and do a 1/4 inch top stitch along the side front, so not the front, the side front. You're going to start at the shoulder seam with your top stitch, go all the way down until you get to right at the band. Do not do the top stitching along the band. Let's do our stitch now. I have my top stitching down here, 1/4 inch away from this edge. Now let's go ahead and put the remaining portion of the zipper onto the other side. And so the same thing, make sure that you have your zipper facing down. You want that zipper tape to be with the raw edge, the opening edge here. You want to match up the top of your zipper stop with that dot. And then you can taper the edge of the zipper tape out of the way. And then just go ahead and pin the remaining of your zipper the same way that we did to the other side. And the zipper stop, it needs to stop right here with this dot that we transferred on the lower edge. Now let's go ahead and stitch really close to the zipper tape. Again, remember, we're going to start and stop at those large circles. All right, once you have your other zipper side sewn on, you can zip your jacket up if you want to just take a quick look at everything. All right, so that's just a quick look at my zipper. It's coming along really well. Let's go ahead and continue constructing the jacket. Next, with the right sides together, let's go ahead and pin and stitch our shoulder seams together. Pin your other shoulder seam the same way, and then we can stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, I have my shoulder seam sewn. I finished off my seam allowance with my serger, and I pressed my seam going toward the yoke, so toward the back. And then on the outside, I did a 1/4 inch top stitch right along that yoke edge. 1/4 inch away from the seam, go ahead and do a top stitch, the same exact thing that we did for the yoke. Once you have that done, we can go ahead and put this to the side and we can start working on the collar. To begin working on the collar, we're going to start with pattern piece 13. This is the upper collar. And along the double notched edge here, you should have double notches here that you place along this edge. From large dot to large dot, we're going to run an ease stitch here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's going to help us to ease in any fullness that we may have once we put the upper collar to the under collar. So again, from large dot all the way over here to large dot. We're going to do a 1/2 inch stitch using an ease stitch. So lengthen out your stitch length to the longest stitch length your machine can go to. Mine goes up to a 5.0. It's typically at about a 2.5. So if you don't know how to do that, refer to your machine manual and go ahead and lengthen out your machine stitch. And let's do a 1/2 inch stitch here from large dot to large dot on the upper collar. All right, now that we have our ease stitching done here, you can see my ease stitch. Again, I went from large dot to large dot. So now let's go ahead and grab the under collar, which is pattern piece number 14, and we're going to match these up right sides facing. And so again, with right sides facing, go ahead and match that up. And if you need to, again, you can start to pull up on that ease stitch to ease in the fullness so everything can match up. Once you're happy, match up your notches, find your double notches, match those up and pin in place. Once you have it all pinned, let's go ahead and stitch along the double notched edge using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your seam sewn, we can go ahead and trim our seam. Once you have it trimmed, go ahead and turn it right sides out. Now we can go ahead and do a basting stitch to baste these raw edges together, and then we can do a 1/4 inch top stitch all the way along the sides and this double notched edge that we just stitched. So let's do a 1/4 inch top stitch and then baste these raw edges together. All right, I've gone ahead and I did my 1/4 inch top stitch all the way along that doubled edge, and then I also did a basting stitch. This here is the under collar, and this is what it looks like here on the upper collar. Now that you have your collar prepped, let's go ahead and pin it onto the jacket. And we can go ahead and clip up to the neckline edge to that stay stitching that we did. That's another reason why stay stitching is good to do. It not only keeps your curves from stretching out, but it gives you a guide that if you need to clip to create some space, you can clip up to your stay stitching line. All right, after you've made a few clips, now we can go ahead and on the outside, pin the under collar side to the jacket. Match up your notches and let's pin in place. All right, I've just pinned on my collar here. And again, the under collar is right side to the jacket. The upper collar should be facing up. Go ahead and match up those notches and the dots and pin your collar in place. And let's go ahead and baste it in place now. Once you have your collar basted on, you do want to go around that seam and just take a look to make sure you don't have any folds or any pulls or anything that needs to be smoothed out. This is the time to go ahead and do that. And now we can go ahead and start to work on the back and front facing. To begin, you want to go ahead and grab your back facing. You should have cut out one of fabric and one of interfacing. Grabbing pattern piece number 15, which is the front facing, you should have cut 2 of the contrast. Again, you can be using faux fur or you could be using corduroy. You could be using the same type of fabric as your main fabric, just maybe in a different color. That's also an option. And so with right side facing, you can go ahead and match up your facings and pin in place. Now that you have them pinned, let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then again, if you like, you can go ahead and finish off the outer edge of your front facing and your back facing now. Once you have your facing sewn together, this is what yours should look like. And again, you can see I went around the edges to finish off my seams here. And so now let's go ahead and grab the jacket. With the right size facing, we're going to stitch the facing to the lower bands first. So grab your facing, and lay it over right sides facing to your jacket like so along the lower bands. Your facing will extend past your lower band. It's not going to be a perfect match right here to the lower band. It will extend past it like so. And let's go ahead and pin this in place. Again, you are pinning the lower edge of the facing to the lower edge of your bands. Now that we have them pinned, let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have the lower edge of the facing and bands sewn together, now we can go ahead and fold the bands along the fold line. So right there where our zipper stops are, that is the fold line. Should be able to fold up right there, right along the fold lines. And now we can start to pin the facing in place along the front and along the neckline seam going all the way around. So again, once we have the facing and the lower bands sewn, we should be able to fold up on the fold line of the bands like so, right there where our zipper stop ends. And now we can pin the remaining part of our facing all the way along the front opening and neckline edges now. All right, now that you have it pinned, and again you have the facing pin going all the way around the front opening as well as the neck edge. Down here at the bottom, you want to make sure you have your seams facing up toward the facing, not toward the bands. Have them facing up. And then we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, around the front opening, the neck edge, and all the way down here. On this side, you do want to be careful with the zipper not to hit the zipper teeth. So you may have to switch over to a zipper foot once you get over here to this side. Let's go ahead and stitch it in place now. All right, now that we have the facing stitched again along the front opening edges and all the way along the neckline seam, let's go ahead and trim down our seam allowance. Now that we have it trimmed, let's go ahead and turn everything right sides out. All right, once we have our facing turned toward the inside, your lower band should naturally fold up like so. And so again, just a quick look on the inside of mine. You can see I finished off that edge. I didn't want the sherpa to continue to fray and just kind of have lint here. So that's why I finished off my edge. For the neck edge, make sure that you trim down your seam. And I also placed some clips here. I do still need to come back in here and just trying to trim it down some. And also clip into those curves so it can kind of spread and release a little bit. So put some clips into the neckline edge and then also trim down that seam allowance to remove some of that bulk because we have a lot of layers of fabric up in here. So definitely trim yours down and give that a good press. And I also just tacked down the seams right here of the facing, the back facing and the front facing. I just tacked it down to the shoulder seam and you can see it right there. If I was using black, you wouldn't be able to see it, but you can see the little tack down right here. And that's just to keep the back facing down so it's not, you know, rolling up while I'm wearing the jacket. So again, after you have trimmed your facing, you have everything turned toward the inside. Now we can start to work on the hem. And for the hem, we're going to be folding up the band, folded up in half, and we're going to pin the raw edge of the band right over the seam. And that's another reason, again, why I went ahead and finished off the seam allowance. I don't want the sherpa to continue to fray on the inside of the jacket. So again, fold up your raw edge right past that seam, turn to the outside, put a pin right at that seam, catching in the raw edge on the inside. Going to do that all the way along the lower band edge. All right, now that you have it pinned, again, we pinned on the outside right into this seam, catching in the raw edge of the hemband on the inside. So once you have it all pinned, now let's go to the sewing machine. We're going to do a stitch in the ditch. We're going to be stitching on the front left edge, and we're going to stitch all the way around to the right side front edge. Let's do that now. Now that we have done our stitch in the ditch, you can see mine here. I got as close as I could to that seam. This is what it looks like along the inside. Again, you want to stitch on the outside, catching in the inner pressed edge along the inside. So this is what mine look like along the inside. Now we need to go ahead and do some more top stitching. We're going to top stitch 1/4 inch away from this edge here. So all the way along the lower edge, exactly where we just did our stitch in the ditch, we're going to follow that up with a top stitch 1/4 inch away from that seam. We're also going to do a top stitch along the front openings as well as the lapels. So start right here where we left off on the collar by squaring down that stitch and then continuing doing 1/4 inch top stitch all the way along the front edge all the way to the bottom of the front band. We're going to do the same thing to the left side as well. Start up here at the collar and then do 1/4 inch top stitch all the way down until you get to the top of the band. So let's go ahead and do all of our top stitching now. All right, once you have your top stitching done down on the lower edge, you can see here, did my top stitching there on the lower edge, and also along the front lapels, you should have done your top stitching. And if you don't know what squaring it off, it's just connecting like the previous stitch here to the next one just by squaring it off there at the corner and then continuing doing your top stitch all the way along the front lapel and the front opening. And so now that we have all the top stitching done, we can put this to the side and start to work on the sleeves. To begin working on our sleeve, we'll need pattern piece number 17, which is our upper sleeve, and pattern piece number 18, which is the under sleeve. And with right sides facing, we're going to match up the double notched edge first. So look at your seams and you have an edge that has double notches. We are going to pin there first. So match up your double notches, pin in place. All right, once you have it pinned, let's go ahead and stitch it now and finish off the raw edge and press it toward the upper sleeve. Once you have your seam sewn, and again, you have pressed your seam going toward the upper sleeve, now we can go ahead and do some top stitching at 1/4 inch away from the seam on the upper sleeve. Let's go ahead and do 1/4 inch top stitch now. All right, now that we have our top stitching done here on our seam, now we can put the sleeve right sides facing. We can pin the remaining seam matching up the single notch and pin in place. Now that we have it pinned, let's stitch using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. To have your seam sewn, you want to go ahead and press your seams open flat. As you can see, I went ahead and finished off my raw edges like so. All right, now again, we can put this to the side and start to work on our sleeve band. For our sleeve band, pattern piece number 19, you should have cut 2. And so with right sides facing, we are going to fold the sleeve band in half like so. And we're going to stitch this seam here. So you can go ahead and pin. Pin the other the same way, and we can stitch using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. All right, now that you have your cuffs sewn, this is what mine look like here. As you can see, I did go ahead and finish off one of the edges right here. That way, again, once we fold it up and we stitch like we did for the hem bands, we'll have a clean edge on the inside of our sleeve. I'm going to go ahead and grab my sleeve, and with right sides facing, I'm going to find my notch, match that up to the sleeve. So you just want to bring that over and pin in place. Once you have it pinned, we can go to the sewing machine. We can stitch using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do the other sleeve the same exact way. All right, now that we have our seam stitched, you can go ahead and trim down your seam and then press the band out like so. And so now we are going to fold the band in half, putting this raw edge right over our seam so that we can do a stitch in the ditch. So on the inside, just bring your raw edge right over the seam, and on the outside, pin, catching in the raw edge on the inside. All right, once you have it all pinned, let's go ahead and stitch right into the seam, catching in the raw edge along the inside. Let's go ahead and do our stitch in the ditch now. And while you're at the machine, after you have the stitch in the ditch, you can go ahead and do a top stitch a 1/4 inch away from that seam. Go ahead and do a top stitch after you have your stitch in the ditch done. All right, once you have your sleeve complete, you have done your stitch in the ditch, and then you also did a 1/4 inch stitch away from that seam. Now we can go ahead and pin our sleeves into the jacket. First, you want to go ahead and locate your notches. The single notch goes toward the front of the jacket, and the double notch goes toward the back. First, I'm going to go ahead and match up my notches. So here's my single notch, and here's my double notch. I'm going to match that up with the notches on the sleeve and pin in place. And then I'm just going to come through the jacket, pull the top part of the sleeve in, like so. And now I can match up all of my circles that I transferred and just pin the remaining of the sleeve in place. Go ahead and pin your other sleeve in the same exact way, and then we can stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then finish off your seam with your serger. Once you have your sleeve sewn, this is what mine look like here, and I went ahead and finished off the edges with my serger. Go ahead and do that for both of your sleeves. And then the last thing for us to do is on the outside, along the front and the back of the jacket, we're going to do a 1/4 inch top stitch all the way along the sleeve seam. Let's go ahead and do that now. Once you have your top stitching done around your sleeve, and I have my seam allowance facing toward the sleeves, so I did not catch in my seam allowance into this stitch. Just for reference, I just did a top stitch on the front and the back. Once you have your sleeves installed, you can give everything one final press, and you are all done sewing Know Me 2132. Well, that is all for the video, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, blessings everyone. Bye.